Talking about assets and financially dividing and wills, did you ever have these conversations with Sham?
I found out after he passed away. The will was written before we were married. My favourite thing in the world was waking up with Sham. Waking up and turning around and him not being there, it's just gut-wrenching still.
Founder of Recommendation and Professional Asian, the largest South Asian community group on Facebook. She also launched successfully her Hey Gorgeous lifestyle shows, supporting all new businesses. Sadly, Zam lost her husband Sham 6 months ago last Christmas.
I love you with all my heart, all my soul. You are really my everything. I love you.
MBE Pranav Bhanot, founder of Wyn.legal, specialising in litigation.
For a single mum, what's going to happen, you know, if your kids are under a certain age? They don't automatically go to the grandparents. You have to say in your will who's going to look after your children.
Do you think women might be nervous about asking these questions because they're afraid of offending?
You see it all the time on Instagram. People show one kind of lifestyle, but the truth is, the cars leased, they owned, there's stuff borrowed, there's stuff there for show, what is actually yours.
If you're in your early 40s and you've done a will, that will may not quite reflect your intention when you're in your early 60s. Contentious probate, where there are fights between siblings or father and child about what happens to the asset. When you are grieving, the last thing you want to focus on is claims coming in or, you know, some delay. It's the last thing you want to deal with. And unfortunately, that's where as lawyers we come in, and when people are at their rock bottom and it only gets worse before it gets better.
How would you advise people to have these uncomfortable conversations?
I think be uncomfortable and just get used to it. No one wants to talk about debt.
I don't understand how, so if a partner passes and they've got a lot of debt, are they liable for that debt?
It's so final, it's so, that's it. I'm never going to see him again, ever.
Hello, I'm Dr. Vanita Ratan.
I'm Anisha Vasani.
Welcome to Taboo Table Talks, where we're uncovering controversial topics in a modern world.
It's now time to question the status quo. So I'd like to welcome our first guest, Zamiha Desai, the founder of Recommendation and Professional Asian, the largest South Asian community group on Facebook with a phenomenal following of 70,000 people and 87,000. She also launched successfully her Hey Gorgeous lifestyle shows, supporting all new businesses for the past 6 years. Sadly, Zam lost her husband Sham 6 months ago last Christmas, and we really want to talk about her journey with what the implications have been after his sad loss.
I'd like to introduce MBE Pranav Bhanot, founder of Wyn.legal, specialising in litigation, father of 2 boys and also my cousin. So he's done me a huge favour by coming in today. So thank you so much, Pranav.
Thank you for having me.
So we have invited both guests on today to discuss grief and the aftermath of social implications after the loss of a loved one. So thank you both for coming on here, and we just obviously wanted to share some insight of, you know, what I think people or spouses go through after a loss. So Zam, deepest condolences to you, my love. I've known you for so many years, and I knew Sham really, really personally as well, both through his restaurants at Purple Flame, and, you know, I've seen you guys work together hand in hand. You had an amazing connection. I know he was your biggest champion as well with the businesses as well. You know, how has this process been for you?
Obviously, it's been difficult. I think everybody goes through a different journey when it comes to grief, but it was really tough. I wasn't expecting it at this time. He did have like chronic kidney disease, so I didn't ever expect him to live like a really long life. But he was only 44, so that kind of came as a shock, and it's been really, I guess, like a lot of soul searching, a lot of kind of digging deep into your memory banks and just trying to remember all the good stuff and the good times, and trying to get into a place where you can let go and just, you know, just be happy. I'm happy that he had a really good life. I'm happy that as a wife I don't have any regrets. I was, you know, there for him. We got on well. We didn't really argue very much. I supported him as much as I could. He supported me. So, I think you just have to focus on like the good things that happened in life. And I think when you see somebody in so much pain, that, you know, that's their time. And I think my faith and what I believe about heaven and the afterlife and everything actually plays a massive part in in the whole process. I don't think you ever get over it. You know, I think when you lose someone that close, they're always there and they're part of your heart. So I don't think you ever get over it. But I think that, you know, it can be easier when you focus on, you know, the nice things that had happened, and you feel gratitude for them being part of your life rather than, you know, pity for them not being there. I would rather have had 10 years with him than never known him at all. And I think that's the way that I look at it.
Absolutely. You know, you said he had kidney failure and you'd known for a while that he wasn't well. Were you mentally preparing yourself for what was going to happen, or did you try and just sort of live for the day and put off what, you know, eventually we're all going to pass away? It's just something that we don't like to talk about. So were you preparing yourself at the time mentally, or not really?
No, not really. I think he'd gone through a whole series of different things. Diabetes, he'd had 2 leg amputations, he was on dialysis, he'd had a kidney transplant, the kidney failed, he was due to go back on dialysis. So there was like a load of things. And I think at one point a few years ago, I was like, especially when he had an infection, he got really ill. And I was like wondering if I was going to, you know, if he was going to wake up the next day. But actually once he had, you know, started the dialysis properly and everything, it kind of gives you a whole new lease of life. And so from that point, I didn't worry so much. I think with him, I think he knew that he wasn't going to have a long life. Like, we both knew that. So I think he chose to live every day how he wanted to. So he wasn't like a health nut. Like, he would rather, you know, kind of have a pint of Carlsberg than a carrot juice kind of person. And so I think he made a conscious effort just to enjoy what he could, because everything was so limited. You know, he was using prosthetics so he could walk, but he couldn't go skiing or dancing. You know, it wasn't easy for him. You know, even with the dialysis, it was 3 times a week at the hospital, and then we shifted to home dialysis, which was 4 times a week. And so he was still, you know, bound by that. So it was difficult to get away. And the only holiday we actually planned after dialysis was during COVID, so we couldn't go. So I think that he'd, you know, he was limited, so he just enjoyed as much as he could, you know, and that's how he lived his life. And, you know, although I had the odd strop about that, you know, I did support him, and I just thought, and now I'm glad that I did, because even though he probably could have made changes to live a little bit longer, he wouldn't have enjoyed his life as much as he did. He wouldn't have eaten what he wanted, or gone where he wanted, or, you know, gone on a bender with his friends. And those are the things that he just, you know, he just really enjoyed himself. So I'm kind of at peace with that. You know, I think that's the best thing you can do. Any individual is just live life for yourself on your terms, the way that you want to, and not be beholden to anybody or anything.
Absolutely.
And how did you cope with seeing his health deteriorate? Because he was such a life and soul of the party. And then I know there was a lot of pressure for you, especially with the home dialysis, looking after him. How did you cope with all of that?
I mean, I was lucky because, you know, I can work from home. I can flex my hours, and so the good thing about it is I was always there for him. So I used to do the dialysis with him. I took him to hospital appointments. You know, I could play a really active role. I mean, dialysis, you know, we were up at 6 o'clock in the morning because he wanted to get it out of the way so he could get on with his day. You know, now I look at it, although nobody really wants to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I guess it was just a blessing that I got to spend the time with him. So now I'm looking at it back thinking it wasn't pressure. It was, you know, it's part of what you do, that in sickness and in health.
You know, one thing that we're not taught is how to deal with grief. So considering this is something we're all going to go through many times in our life, we don't really get taught how to do it. And the question really is, what have you found helpful as a coping strategy, or tools maybe that sort of get you through the day or get you through a tough moment. Is there anything you can share with people going through a similar thing?
I think the first and foremost is just lean into what you're feeling. You know, so many people say to you, "Oh, be strong, don't cry," and it's like, no. If I want to cry, I'm going to cry. If I don't feel strong, I don't need to feel strong for you. I need to release what I'm feeling and try and build my life back. You know, I think there are certain things you have to recognise. You have to recognise that your life's not going to be the same, but at the same time, you're still going to have to live your life. You know, it might be without the person or the people, because like you say, our parents, our siblings, our partners, we don't know who we're going to lose when, but it is inevitable. So I think you just have to, you know, realise that you have to find a new norm. And I think you have to think about how would they want you to be. I think that's what people forget. I mean, I know Sham never liked to see me cry. He was like, okay, after a while he'd be like, yeah, right, Zamiha, you know, enough now. We're done with the crying, you know. And I think that's how I kind of, when I feel sad, I have a little cry, and then I just think, oh, you know, Sham didn't want to see me cry. He didn't want to see me upset. I think even me as a parent, when I go, I don't want to see my kids upset. I want them to just take, you know, life by the horns and just go and enjoy it and build whatever they can, whatever they want to, you know, leave their legacy. They should be doing that. I should be doing that. Anybody who loses someone, you know, if you feel that someone's looking after you from above, that they're there with you, they're cheerleading you, they're still doing that. So, like, I guess to some extent I don't want to feel like I let him down, because he gave me so many opportunities. He allowed me to, you know, create this business. He supported me while I was like earning nothing. You know, he did what he could to make my life good and help me build my legacy. So I should carry on that, even if he's not there, because he's still there and he's still in your heart, you know.
Can you almost still hear him? So like anyone that's passed away from me, who's very close to me, I can almost in any situation hear what that person would tell me in that moment and almost feel like they were right there with me.
You know, that's like a funny thing, because it's kind of frustrating. I think the one thing that happens when someone dies is you just want it to be like Ghost. You want kind of, you know,
the pottery scene.
You want to feel them. You want some crazy psychic to come up to you and tell you that, you know, they're talking to you. And I think, you know, it's the kind of thing where you close your eyes at night and you just wish you could see them. You wish you could have those final last words. Because I didn't, you know, he was sedated, so I never got to have a final goodbye or anything, you know. And it's the kind of thing you crave, and you know, you just wish so much it could happen. So I mean, yeah, I could imagine what he would say in certain situations, and you know, I do believe that he kind of sends messages, like some weird things have happened, or a song has come on at, you know, whenever I go to Purple Flame, the same song comes on, which is the song that I associate with him, and it's just really freaky. You know, there are certain things that happen that make me feel he's still around, but I don't hear him in my ear, kind of thing.
It's been really hard.
Yeah, it was hard, but it's also, it's like some people never find love. You know, some people don't have a good relationship. I think you have to, even in your hard times, you have to count your blessings, and you have to say, well, you know, I mean, I was divorced, you know, Sham was my second husband, so I've had like a tough marriage, and I've had an amazing one. And so I think you just have to thank God that, you know, he gave you what he gave you, even if it was temporary. Like I said, it's just better than not having it at all.
You know, one thing I've always struggled with is how when someone's just passed away, how on earth are you in the mental space to even put a funeral together, let alone something on this size? How did you do it?
You kind of go into some weird overdrive mode.
Okay.
It's like, and in a way, I think I think you need to because you need to focus on something, and because you love someone, you want the very best for them, and so you put so much effort into making this day as special as you can. So yeah, I think something just kicks in, and you just get on with it and do it, and actually, you know, you have people around you, and I had messages coming in, and you know, people phoning me and seeing if I was all right, and it's quite busy. And I think after the funeral, when everything settles down, that's the time that you really reflect, and there are certain moments in the day that you do kind of, you know, it hits you. For me, it was the mornings. I'm like, my favourite thing in the world was waking up with Sham, you know, and obviously I still don't sleep on my side of the bed. I sleep on his, because I just can't bear the thought of waking up and turning around and him not being there. It's just, you know, gut-wrenching still. You know, I still wear my rings, I still wear my Mangalsutra, I still feel very much married.
Yeah.
So, you know, that those kind of things, there are little parts of your day and little things that you don't expect, and it catches you off guard.
But you know, I've got goosebumps, just you talking about this, and it's really emotional, and it's just like, how do you stay so positively strong? Obviously, helping so many other people out there, but also like, just, I think it's a topic that's so hard for us to navigate through it and talk about when your partner is alive, and, you know, talking about assets and, you know, financially dividing and talking about wills. Did you ever have these conversations with Sham when he was here?
I didn't even know he had a will, and I found out after he passed away, and the will was written before we were married. So it was all a bit complicated, and bless him, I love him, but he was the worst bookkeeper. I found so much crap. You know, like bits of paper here and there, letters that hadn't been opened. It was literally, I have no idea what was where and why, and I did a big post on this on recommendation, because you have to know where you stand, because you don't know what's going to happen when. Like, I was completely unprepared. I thought he would live another 10 years maybe. If you look at someone like Delari, I think she lost her husband when she was, late 20s, like 27, 28. You just don't know when it's going to happen and why, and when it's somebody's time, it's their time. You don't have any control over it. And then when they go, and you're left with like piles of paperwork, and I don't know what's where, I don't know, you know, what debt is racked up, I don't know what loans were out, I don't know, you know, what credit cards he used. There's so much I don't know. We kind of, the way that we managed our finances is sensibly. I looked after the bills, otherwise he would never get paid. You know, he looked after the rent, you know, the holidays and stuff like that. But I didn't ever kind of question like where the money was coming from, if it was coming from, you know, the wages, the business, the dividends, you know, the credit cards. I didn't know anything. And I think women are probably a lot in that position where, you know, they do their bit, their partner does their bit, and they don't kind of, it's kind of embarrassing.
Is that what it is? Like, why was that question not asked? Like, is it an embarrassing question to ask? Like, do you have a will?
Okay, embarrassing is the wrong word. I think it's just, it never feels like an appropriate time.
Yeah.
And it's not that I never asked him. Like, so weirdly that week, I had come back with the will template, and I said, you know, we have to do this. But of course he went into hospital, so we never did it.
Wow.
But I was doing mine, and I was like, I'm doing mine, so you do yours at the same time.
Yeah.
We'll just do it together. So it was just unfortunate timing, or that's the way God willed it, or whatever. You know, I think it's important that, you know, when you don't know this stuff, you don't sit. It's very easy to sit in a place of anger that, why didn't they tell me this? Why didn't they tell me that? Why, you know, why is the, you know, the visa just racked up? You know, why is this debt here? Why did he borrow money from there? It's that kind of thing. You know, it's so easy to get angry about it, but I was like, okay, well, it is what it is. can't change it, so let's just try and sort this out as as fairly as possible. And I mean, I'm lucky I have a good relationship with his family, I have a good relationship with his friends and his business partner and everything like that, so we were able to sort quite a lot out. But some people, sadly, when people pass away, it's all about the money. It's all about what's left, what's the assets, what is the business worth, how many houses are there. You get drawn into this whole thing of money, and when you're grieving a loss and then all this hits you, I can imagine that it must be really hard for some people. So I just want to try and encourage people to get their ducks in a row, I suppose. And it is a difficult conversation. One lady messaged me, she said, my husband thinks I want him dead because I'm bringing all this stuff up. And that's not it at all. It's both of you, as a woman, if you go, like, what's going to happen? If you're a single mum, what's going to happen? If your kids are under a certain age, you're going to give me the stats on this, I hope. But they don't automatically go to the grandparents or anything. You have to say in your will who's going to look after your children and everything. Like, do people even know that? Have they even thought about their own, death? Yeah. What if you guys, sadly, unfortunately, maybe go together? Then what happens to everything? Like, you get caught up in the whole romance and, getting married and everything like that. But do you really think about what could happen in your future if the worst happens? Yeah. And we just don't know. We get car insurance, we get home insurance, everything like that, but have we got life insurance? Have we got even just a will to say what would happen if the worst happened? I don't think we do.
I agree. Do you think women might be nervous about asking these questions because they're afraid of offending the male partner, and maybe partly wishing them dead, and the whole thought process there.
You just say for the money.
Yeah, for the money. But also asking them to almost like open up their books and say they're not very good at bookkeeping, and say they're not doing as well as maybe you think they're doing. Is that quite an embarrassing question for the female to ask, and also for the male to show? You know, is that tension there as well? That's.
Yeah, I mean, you see it all the time on like Instagram and stuff, that people show one kind of lifestyle, but the truth is, are the cars leased? Are they owned? Is stuff borrowed? Is stuff there for show? What is actually yours? Where is actually the income coming from? Are you, have you got a load of businesses and you're kind of robbing one to pay the other? Like, you don't know. And I guess it can cause some embarrassment if, people's finances aren't transparent and they're not aligned, and a lot of money might be not liquid or whatever. I mean, there's so many scenarios. Yeah. Absolutely so many.
Yeah. Did you have these transparent conversations with Shando?
No.
Knowing that he was going to be ill, and did you never feel, because I'm surprised by this. Yeah. Because I knew your relationship. So I was just like, how does Zam, being so business savvy and being so strong-minded in what you beautifully had, why did you find it was awkward or not in what you didn't have the rights to ask him about his financial situations or setting up a will or having these transparent conversations?
It was weird. It was always like the intention to have it. So it's not that I ever felt bad asking him, but I was like, we have to sit down on Sunday and talk about this, and like the last thing you want to do on Sunday is dive into some Excel spreadsheet with like bills and outgoings and incomings and everything like that. So, and he was a little bit kind of champagne taste, lemonade pockets a little bit. Like, he liked good stuff. Like, if he went away, it would have to be like a 5-star hotel. Like, nothing else would do. And I think that sometimes got him into a little bit like, oh, okay, need to kind of, cut down on this or cut back on that, or, might not be able to go here so much. And I think, but he never really wanted to show that there was any issue. He just, I think, at the end of the day, I think from a place of love, he was just like, I want Zamiha to feel secure and happy and not worry about this kind of things. I mean, we all do it with our kids, that we don't discuss money in front of our children because we don't want them to have that extra thing to worry about. But actually, maybe we need to say, if you want this standard of living, you want this lifestyle, then this is what you've got to do, and you can't get into debt, and this is what an interest rate does, and this is what like an ISA does, and maybe we also need to
absolutely
educate ourselves and educate our children, and not be scared to talk about it.
I completely agree with you. Even with Sienna, for example, she instead of saying you need to do well at school, and in not translating into exactly what does that mean as a lifestyle, what I did is I explained all the different career options or business options, how much you earn doing these careers or business, and what that life looks like. So they can physically see, okay, if I go down this path, this is what my life would look like. Or if I do this, she wants to be an ice cream taster, for example. So if you become an ice cream taster, this is how much you'll earn, and this is what you'll be able to, this is where you'll be living, etc. Which is fine if that's like your passion. But if it's not your passion and there's something you can do on the side, then maybe think about something that's going to sustain you and actually go through the numbers. And she was 9 at the time, and she was understanding. So even right now, interest rates have gone through the roof. We were discussing one of my properties has gone up to 9%. It's crazy, I know. And explaining that to her, that it's an HMO, you have higher interest rates, and this is how much is eating into the profits, and now actually making a loss. But her understanding that puts her in a much stronger position than work hard and do well. Like that rhetoric just doesn't, it's not powerful enough for the child to go and study,
Yeah,
so I completely agree. I think we have to be completely transparent even with the children, and don't worry about them not getting it. If they can understand algebra, they can understand basic maths and basic salary, So yeah, no, I completely agree with you. With you, Pranav, I wanted to pick up on some of the things that Zamiha said, and I think the first place we want to start with is, what common problems have you seen when it comes to wills? You've seen lots of different types of cases. What would you say is something that we should all keep our eyes open for?
I think the first thing I'd like to say is I think Zamiha's just spoken really, really well, and her kind of what she described is not uncommon at all. We see it a lot where either there isn't a will or the will isn't updated to reflect the new circumstances. So for example, if there was a previous will and then you get married and then you haven't updated that will, that can be and that is one of the more common problems. So if you're in your early 40s and you've done a will, that will may not quite reflect your intention when you're in your early 60s. So actually, yes, there's one thing having a will, but there's another thing actually thinking every year or every 5 years, does this actually reflect my state of play? Are my relationships still as I value them and as reflected in the will? So the common issues are not having a will, which I think is very common, and people don't talk about it. There's a bit of a taboo in relation to talking about it. And when there is a will, there isn't enough updates taking place. Yeah. And then you have the instances where there is a will, but people aren't happy with either how it's been written, because there are some legal formalities in which a will is expected to comply with in order for it to be valid, or family members aren't happy that they haven't been left something or anything or enough. And that's particularly common in the South Asian community, I find, and from experience with clients, where there is this idea of favoritism in our organisational structures. There might be a son that's preferred because he went off to be a doctor, or there's a son that actually decided to live with the family and didn't move out of the family home and has cared for his parents. Or, sadly, there is a daughter who's married into another family, and actually there's been some reason for not necessarily accommodating that daughter into the will. And these are all really common instances that we see when we look at wills. And what I specialise in isn't actually so much writing the wills, but it's actually litigating. So when disputes occur, we kind of call it contentious probate, where there are fights between siblings or between father and child about what happens to the asset. So these are really, what we're trying to prepare people. This is where this podcast is so helpful, because if you get the fundamentals right and have a will and it's clear and you accommodate for everyone, and if you don't accommodate for anyone, be very clear why you don't accommodate for them, it will resolve issues later on down the line. And as Zamiha said, when you are grieving, the last thing you want to focus on is claims coming in, or some delay in the probate being granted, and it's the last thing you want to deal with. And unfortunately, that's where as lawyers we come in, and when people are at their rock bottom, and it only gets worse before it gets better. And that's why people don't like lawyers very much.
So what advice would you give to both single people like myself who own properties and have assets, who doesn't have a will, guilty, but also to people that need to have these conversations with their partners, however young or old, and find it themselves in a very awkward position to have this because of this whole, like we said, taboo kind of, speculation around it, that if we do have these conversations, it means that we're just only focusing about money and, we want to claim things that we're not necessarily entitled to or are entitled to. How would you advise people to, one, start a will? What's the cheapest and, quickest way to do it? And to have these conversations.
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. So
if
I just
you can break it down.
The first is, there is nothing necessarily wrong in downloading a template, and I think we spoke about templates. People do that, and there are risks with it, because wills are, they can be litigated in court, so they can be a bit like a contract, and so you want it to be properly drafted, really. But not everyone wants to pay lots of money on having a will, and that's completely understandable. So if you are going to download it, it's probably worth getting it kind of eyeballed by, it doesn't have to be a lawyer, but somebody who knows what they're doing, I would say. That's the first thing. Having a will, I would get one in the first instance, and I can go into why in a few moments about what happens if something, touch wood, and it will never happen, but if something happened to you and what will happen to those properties. I think there is a feeling that it will all get lost somewhere, and I think it's important we do talk about that at some point. Having these frank conversations, and I'm guilty of it. I'm not going to try and preach. I don't think I have anywhere near, and I do this for a living, I don't think I have enough family conversations about, what would happen if something happened to me or my parents or my wife, and I would probably be a bit stuck, in all honesty. So this is not me being the person who knows it all, but I think this podcast is very helpful because it's making me think, and it's actually, hopefully will make your listeners think as well about what steps can be taken, what conversations can be had to maximise the chances of property being left in not just safe hands, but in the hands of people that you actually want those properties to be in, and that's pretty important.
One question actually was about children, actually something Zamiha talked about, and that's what happens, God forbid, if both parents pass away. What happens to the children? Do they automatically go to the grandparents? And so I've written in my will that I want my kids to go to my brother. I only told him the other day, by the way. So Shiv, if you're watching. But just because they live near us, they can go to the same schools. Like literally just thinking practically, they see each other every week, so the cousins get on, and literally, we've got very similar thought process, how we want to raise the kids. But if you haven't discussed it, and if you haven't got a will, why do the children not just go to one of the grandparents? Like, where do the kids go then?
It's a really good question, and some wills cover this, some wills don't. There are other legal documents that you can have in place that will talk about things like we use the word custodial rights or looking after rights. So I'll be honest, lots of wills that I see don't cover this, and they probably should actually. So your will is probably pretty well drafted. The starting point, and the one caveat I will say is that I'm not a family lawyer, so I have to just caveat that. Okay. I normally deal with disputes, but not family disputes, but will disputes. But I think the first thing is always, the courts will always look at the intention of the parents. That's rule number one. If there is no will, or the intention isn't clear, the courts or the local authorities will probably look at the next, not necessarily the next closest person to an individual, but the most practical solution. So it may be that parents themselves may be elderly, the grandparents may be elderly, who may not be able to look after your children, in which case actually your brother may be a good option because he may have the financial ability to do it, the energy to do it. You say he's got kids as well. So there is a kind of a balancing act to be had between not just how close the relative is, but also the means and ability for that relative to look after your children if God forbid something like that happened. There are other documents as well that you can have to reflect these instances.
My parents have been trying to sit me down, Pranav. They have got wills in place and they've been trying to have this conversation with me, which I was talking to Bhanot about, where they want to sit me down, but I find it really hard to have those conversations. I'm sure many people are in these positions. How can the younger generation have these awkward conversations with their parents, or even the parents, talk to parents about drawing up a will? Because again, it's the same situation as a spouse or a partner. How would you advise people to have these uncomfortable conversations?
Well, I think be uncomfortable and just get used to it, because I don't think it is easy. No one wants to talk about death.
Yeah.
No one really wants to talk about what will happen to property, or how that property is going to be distributed between siblings if you have them all sat down. It could actually lead to more problems while everyone's alive, than later. But the reality is that it does need to happen. And I think if there is a take-home message from kind of this segment of the question, it is just to allocate 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be very long. I think actually the anticipation is worse than the actual conversation. And just say, look, this is what my intention is at the moment as a parent or as a grandparent, whoever may be listening to this. Just say how you want it to be. It's your assets, it's your hard-earned money, you've worked your whole life towards it. You have a right to have those conversations with the people that matter most in your world. Because if you're not going to have them with those people, unfortunately, it could be down to the courts that will decide. And the courts will, there is a law, there are laws in place that will tell you how assets are going to be distributed if you're not clear and have had those clear conversations.
The other big one is children having that conversation with their elder parents. So I think I've heard a lot of sad stories actually where, elderly parents have given their money to their children, and when they needed it the most, in order to avoid inheritance tax over 7 years, but when they needed it the most when they were older, they didn't get the financial help that they needed from their children. And so now I almost feel like I don't want my parents to gift us anything. I want them to have everything they have earned until they go, and then pay your inheritance tax and whatever else is left, divvy it up. What have you seen in practical setting of this kind of, is this quite common, or is this just a rare exception?
No, I think it is quite common. And it's that balancing act between being tax savvy with the inheritance tax, but actually leaving enough for old age. And there are, I'm not a financial advisor, but what I have seen is, not all, having a little reserve fund for old age. And it's always hard to know how much to leave, right? You don't know if you have to go into a care home or what the future holds. But yes, of course, there is this element of saving tax or being tax savvy, but there is a practical aspect. And that practical aspect is having enough to look after your own elderly care costs. Don't rely on anyone, because it's not because children may be selfish. It may be because actually change of circumstances. We're going for a cost of living crisis right now. People need all the cash they can get. And so, I think there is a level of everyone having to just look out for their own just a little bit, because if, you just don't want to rely on anyone going forward. So leaving enough is definitely the best thing. If you do have to pay a bit of inheritance tax, well, it's probably worth it if you have enough to cover your care costs. And some elderly people what they do is they work towards paying off their mortgage. So they're living in a mortgage-free house, and so they've got a real asset there should they need to tap into any extra equity in the long run to look after their care costs.
Oh, absolutely. There must be cases where people have remortgaged their house and other people don't know about it, and like I said, leased cars, built up credit card debt. I don't know, people might see something and think, oh, well, when they die, I'll have the house. But actually, all the debts have to get paid first. It's not as simple as just inheriting a house.
what do you do in that situation where you are left with debt? Well, there are some specialist organisations out there that can help, for example, consolidate debt. I think, and I would like to think, a lot of organisations who are creditors, who are owed this money, will adopt a bit of a sympathetic approach when you are left alone. Because this is not an instance where you are neglecting to pay. This is an instance where all of a sudden, instead of having a windfall, it's actually the opposite of a windfall, where you're finding, you need to somehow manage paying off money that wasn't actually in your own name in the first instance. So negotiation is always a big tip. Using debt consolidation companies, if that is something that can be dealt with. In some instances, I have seen organisations write off the debt. It doesn't happen very often, but I have seen it where they have taken a sympathetic view. They've looked at the means of a single person, perhaps with children, and they thought, what, we're probably not going to get the whole debt paid off. And if we are, it will be small amounts every month for a very long period. We may be better off, writing off that debt.
I don't understand how. So if a partner passes and they've got a lot of debt, how is a partner left behind? Are they liable for that debt?
There can be if, for example, it's a debt related to a home and you're both joint owners of a home.
Okay.
Because I think, like was covered earlier, you, in a household, you assume your own responsibilities. Some may be responsible for the rent, some may be responsible for the bills. But, in the eyes of the law, you could be both your names on the contract. But actually, internally, you're just deciding who's going to, whose income's going to be paying towards what.
Yeah.
But from an outsider's perspective, they don't know what the internal arrangements are. And in that instance, you could find yourself liable. Same
So
with
just of your house, not any other debts.
Well,
just
it
the house you
depends
live in.
whether you could have joint credit cards, you could have joint car ownership, you could have joint houses, as we've said. It can be anything that you own. It could be in the names of both parties, and in that instance, you could both be liable for it. And a lot of contracts, when you're signing for these kind of credit schemes, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's a leasing of a car, they put you joint and severably liable, and that's like a term that you commonly find. And what that means is that the creditors, whoever you owe money to, can come after one or both of you for payment. And that would kick in if one party had passed away and there's only one party left who can physically pay. So it can happen, but
That's quite
you are told about it at the same time. And if there's a policy, like a life policy in place, it may be that those can kick in. So there are mechanisms to overcome it. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom, but it can be if there aren't policies in place. And I don't think there's any judgment involved in that because people don't take these steps. You're talking about bookkeeping. People don't keep papers around it, and we're living in this age where some things are sent by post, some things are sent by email. We're in this hybrid world where not everything's fully postal and not everything's fully like electronic. It might all change in the future, but we're in that intermediate stage at the moment. So it happens. But I think another take-home message really from this is that there shouldn't be any judgment and there will always be a solution. Because I like to think we're living in a country where there is a support network, so there are charitable organisations, the local authorities do kick in, and the law as a backstop will kind of help where somebody's really, really struggling. I don't think this country will let people fail if they can absolutely avoid it.
So Zam, earlier you talked about that you've been previously divorced as well, and obviously this grief that you're going through is obviously completely different to the trauma you went on. What's the comparison in terms of that? Because obviously you've been through the trauma with a divorce and now the trauma with grief.
I think the divorce, I actively wanted it. I didn't want to be in that marriage anymore. So it's scary because there's a lot of, there's the children, there's a financial codependency, there's like a life that you build together, there's, external things like, what will community think? Or will people say, X, Y, Z, they'll be talking about me, that kind of thing. So you go through a lot. It's a big decision to get divorced, but ultimately, are you happy or are you not happy? And, I don't think either of us were happy, and we weren't in a good place. And so obviously, it's difficult, but it was worth doing for yourself. For me to become who I am and to live my life the way that I wanted to genuinely and authentically. And yeah, there were complications with the children and stuff, but it's still something that I needed to do. I think when you become a widow, it gets taken away from you. You don't have a choice. You don't. It's just that, you know, your world just falls apart and it changes, and you have no say in it. You have no. You might not have an inkling that it was even going to happen. It could just happen all of a sudden. You could have been with someone for, you know, 1 year or 60 years, you know, but your life just changed in the blink, literally in the blink of an eye. You know, it's like 1 second they're breathing and in a split second they're not. It's that quick. And I don't think that you can prepare for it, even when somebody's ill, even when you know it's going to happen. It's so final. It's so, that's it. I'm never going to see him again, ever. It's just completely different. And while you still have to, like, find a new life, it's not because you chose to, it's because you have to.
Oh my goodness, wow. I'm like, oh, do you know what, you don't think that? I think you always take your partner for granted. And I'm just thinking about my partner and, like, just the most incredible man I've ever met. And just even then, I still feel like I take him for granted. I don't think every day that this could be the last time I'm seeing you, or this is the last time. You know, you don't think like that, but
no, but you
maybe
can't
you should.
think like that either. No, because otherwise your life will be completely unbalanced. I mean, I think one of the things that when people die, whoever it is you always think, I should have done this, I should have done that, I could have done this, I would have spent more time with them, I should have gone on that holiday with them, I shouldn't have spoken to them like that. But life doesn't work like that. You know, I literally couldn't, you can't, you know, focus on one person, because everything else in your life will suffer. So I had to give attention to Sham, but I also had to give attention to work. I had to get attention to my kids, to my friends, to my family, to myself. You know, you have to split your attention. You can't live your life scared that somebody's going to die, because they are going to die. But you can't be scared of it, because you have to live your life as well. You know, and if I'd spent all the time that I could have spent so much more time with Sham, but at what cost to other things in my life. So he's one part of my life that is gone, and it's not coming back, and he's no longer there. But all those other parts of my life are still there. You know, and I don't think you should be afraid to live them. You know, I was worried because I was, God, I came to your event. Yours was the first event I came to after Sham died, and it was scary, but I went out, I did things. Other people aren't ready to go out. Other people were probably like, oh, why is she out so quickly? You know what? Those parts of my life are still there, and I'd be doing him a disservice if I didn't, you know, live them. Because he would be like in my ear going, you're not going to Nisha's, what's wrong with you? You're not going to see Dr. B? Are you kidding? No, I think he appreciated that I enjoyed aspects of my life, and because he's not here, I can't just sit in grief like all the time. I still enjoy seeing my friends. I enjoy going out for dinner. I don't feel like doing a lot of stuff sometimes. Like, I don't want to do it, and I don't have the urge to do it like I used to when he was here. But that's okay. I can say no, or I can say, yeah, I can do what I want.
Yeah. So even I found it incredible that you did Hey Gorgeous 3 months later. Like, it was one of the biggest, I don't know if you guys know, it's one of the biggest shows. It's a shopping show for small businesses, and Zamiha really puts them on a platform, and
there were queues.
The queues that went round and round the building. It really was incredible, and this was 3 months after. And you were, honestly, to pull that off, most people would not even be able to get out of bed. I don't know how you did it. Did it help focusing on work at that time? Like, or was it?
Gosh, I think it had already been set in motion, and so I think, you know, I would never want to let down, you know, my businesses and everything. And don't forget, I have an incredible team that work with me, with Persia, Navari, Natasha, Nico. You know, the whole team is about, like 20 strong, and they pull together to make this happen. So it's not all on me. I can't take the credit. But yeah, I mean, Sham loved Hey Gorgeous. Like, he was there almost every time. The only one he didn't attend was the last one, actually. And that's because he was off with the boys. And I'm grateful for that, because he had, like, the best weekend ever as well. So, but he was at all the others. He used to send around, like, text to his friends saying, oh, you know, go to Hey Gorgeous and so on. He was always really supportive. And I just think, you know, it was probably our most successful one ever. The highest footfall. We had like nearly 8,000 people through the door over the weekend.
Oh my goodness.
Insane.
I didn't realise that number.
Yeah,
Wow.
and because you get VIP entry. Like, don't you know Dr. Vinita coming through, and then all these people are like, oh my God, that's Vinita Dr. Vinita. She's like the biggest superstar.
No, stop.
So,
She has to be at the next one now, I have told her.
so, I mean, we're obviously very blessed, but, you know, it's one of those things where you just feel like he's there and he's shining down and kind of sending the good vibes. And I was like, oh God, it's raining and all that. But then, you know, that was maybe a good thing that it was raining, because otherwise we would have just been turning people away. It would control the numbers from the heavens.
Insane,
somehow.
yeah.
So, I mean, I like dealing with the small businesses. I like dealing with influencers. I like speaking to everybody. I actually, you know, it did take my mind off things, but I had to do it. I couldn't not do it.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And it got me the chance to see a lot of people, and a lot of people came and, you know, gave their condolences and stuff. And I just feel really grateful for the amount of blessings that people give me. You know, and Ange from Angeli's Lookbook was with me. She's like, oh God, how do you do it? All these people, you know, and it's such a sad time.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, you can draw so much strength from.
100%. It's because you put so much love out there, Zamiha, that the blessings will come. You know, the more you give, it comes back tenfold. And that is your entire ethos. For you to even to think to do this, and to put everyone on this platform, can you just imagine how much goodwill that you've cultivated in the community, how much love you've got, really, from all of us.
Oh, thank you.
But that's why we all, you know, cherish you, respect you, and when you speak with authority. You're coming from a lot more experience than any of us could even imagine. You know, it's almost like you've walked the path and you're saying, hey guys, these are the landmines, these are the things to avoid, and like guiding us, you know. So we couldn't be more grateful.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're very, 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 very proud of you, and just I'm glad that you did go through with Hey Gorgeous and you saw it through all the way, because that's what Sham would have wanted.
Oh, absolutely.
And he was with you in spirit for sure, and I know how many people admired you and got to see you, like you said. Did you feel on the other side there were a lot of people that were judging you as well for stepping out too soon? Like even when you came to my event, because now suddenly you're a widow and there's a lot of stigma around being a widow and how you should and should not be perceived, especially from obviously the older generation, certain days that you can't go out. I know it's different for a lot of cultures, but do you feel like people, especially maybe the older generation, were saying, I don't think you should be doing that just yet? Or has it changed now, finally, and people are more open to you just leading life? Good. That's exactly how it should be.
I you know, when you've got a platform, I mean, you guys must know, you've got lots of followers and stuff, you cannot please everybody. You know, that everyone's gonna think something, sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes, you know, they're not bothered, whatever. You just can't please everybody, and so you just have to please yourself. So if they think that I went out too early, they might be right according to their headspace, but they're not in my headspace. And in my headspace, I was, you know, I needed to get out, I needed to see my friends, I needed to work, I needed to network, you know, I needed to get a facial from the skin clinic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was it skin
The London
clinic?
Skin Clinic.
Yeah. You know,
To make you feel good.
yeah, I needed to do certain things for me, and it might not be the same thing that somebody else would need to do for them in their moment of grief, but we're not all the same, and we don't, you know, all have the same issues and values and, you know, things that they think that they should do. But I think a lot of the time people are like, well, what will people think? And they don't do things because what will people think?
Wow.
And it doesn't matter what people think.
It really doesn't
because
matter.
You're just doing yourself a disservice
Yeah.
by not being you.
Mm.
You know, and I know my husband, he would be out.
Yeah.
Like, you know, his friends were his family, they were his support network. And, you know, you need to lean on who you need to lean on, and you just need to lean into what you're feeling. So, you know, if I want to go out, I'll go out. If I want to stay in, I'll stay in. If I want to sit and watch Netflix for, you know, 5 hours and watch, like, see my auntie do her thing, then that's what I'm going to do. If I want to get a pizza, that's what I'm going to do. If I want to get blind drunk, guess what?
That's
what
what
you're
you're
gonna
do.
Oh,
we're
thank
so
you
proud
much,
of you.
guys.
Yeah,
Honestly,
thank
both
you so
of
much.
you.
Coming on as an expert, showing so
Yeah.
much insight and value, and just so much admiration for you for
Thank
everything
you.
you've been on, and
Thank
just
you.
keep shining bright
Thank you.
and sending you lots of strength.
Please do know that we're in the comment section for 1 hour at the launch of every YouTube video. So make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know that we're here, because we'll be answering your questions. Also, we're going to have Pranav in the comment section too. I'm just letting him know now. So come and ask him your legal advice questions for free. And thank you so much, Zamiha, as well. So I'm going to be tagging everybody's Instagram, including our Instagram, so you can come and ask us questions on Taboo Table Talks. Come and ask us the conversations you want us to have, the experts that you want us to have on here, things that you're struggling with that maybe you can't discuss with the people around you, but you'd like us to talk about here, because if you're struggling, so are millions of other people. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Anisha.
Thank you, my darling. And make sure you guys like, follow, and subscribe, and share Taboo Table Podcast with all your followers and friends. You know, the more we create awareness, the more we can change conversations. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.